Hi, I'm Brian Thomas, Research Associate at the Institute for Creation Research. In August 2016, the ICR Science team conducted a tour of a cool set of fossils during an event held at Denton Bible Church in North Texas. The church displayed dinosaurs, mosasaurs, pterosaurs, and other fascinating fossils, both on stage and in their lobby, for hundreds of visitors to see. ICR geologist Dr. Tim Clary, zoologist Mr. Frank Sherwin, physicist Dr. Jake Hebert, and I took turns sharing fascinating facts about how fossils confirm biblical creation and the Genesis flood. Dr. Clary tells about a marine reptile called a mosasaur and reminds us that sea monsters like this were real, and so were the ones that the Bible describes. Mr. Sherwin describes the precision design that made reptile flight possible. We can see that God left evidence of His expert handiwork even in the buried remains of a pterosaur. And Dr. Hebert explains how thousands of dinosaurs buried together in a heap suggest an enormous watery catastrophe that has more to do with Noah's flood than any of the evolutionary stories you may have heard in school. In fact, our fossil tour today will give you key information that you won't find in many classrooms, textbooks, or museums. As creation scientists, we're passionate about presenting the credibility of creation, and we enjoy explaining dinosaurs in the context of biblical history. So we grouped bits and pieces of the various tours into 5 topics. The first topic is design. Expert design in dinosaur and other animal skeletons refutes evolutionary ideas about how nature, not God, somehow crafted all creatures. Even children can understand that natural processes like wind and predation never invent new animal forms. It takes a God to do that. So I invite you to join our tour today, along with the parents and children gathered around each speaker, and listen to the ways that each of these remarkable fossils confirms biblical creation. Let's take a look at design in fossils. And we see design in this Albertosaurus right here. We see design in the way its whole body is balanced. For example, we see design in the way that the front of it weighs just as much as what's behind the legs. And it was balanced perfectly front to back on those back legs. And we also see design in the way that its body would have moved. So the muscles would have connected the base of the tail with its thigh muscles. So everyone point to your thigh muscle right here. Good. Now that can help you run. You use your thigh muscles to run, right? Could Albertosaurus run? He could run really well because of design. And every time he took one step with this leg, his tail moved to the side just a little bit to balance him from left to right. So he had front to back balance and he had left to right balance, all because of the design in the Albertosaurus. It's what we would expect to see if God made dinosaurs, not nature.
The pteranodon is a flying reptile. It has very unique appendages. The front legs, if I can use that phrase, it's really wings, aren't they? And these wings, the bony protuberances there that have a membrane, a membranous flap that act as for flight characteristics, so these things could fly.
This was a well-designed flyer, and you can tell because of this pteroid bone. It looks like it's smaller than my finger. It's like the size of my pinky finger. Do you see the pteroid bone? Do you see it? Do you see what I'm talking about? Okay. It was connected to a little skin flap, and it's exactly what he needed in order to fly stably at low speeds. In other words, when he's taking off and when he's landing. It's the same thing you see on the front of an airplane when you fly in an airplane, and you see the front flap come down the front of that airplane wing when he's landing the airplane. And why does he do that? Because it adds stability. If he didn't do that, then at low air speeds, the airplane would drop right out of the sky. He didn't drop right out of the sky. He just swung out his pteroid bone, a little flap of skin in the front, and he could land with a controlled descent all the way to the ground. Very well designed.
This is not a dinosaur. See, if it flew, it's not a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are reptiles that walked on land. They had to walk upright, so their legs are all upright. You know, it's the T-Rex and all these animals we've been looking at, they walk very vertical, upright, or erect as we call it. So they had hips that made things in, they holes in the hip sockets, and they walked erect. And that's what made a dinosaur a dinosaur. Crocodiles, alligators, turtles, they don't walk erect, they sprawl. Their legs come out to the side, they drag their bellies. Dinosaurs are very leggy. They're able to run around, walk around, very, very leggy animals.
These trilobites occur in the lowermost fossils. So you've got granite at the bottom of the earth, and then you've got sedimentary rocks, and then you've got the first sedimentary rocks with fossils. It's called Cambrian, that's the name of the layer. And in those Cambrian rocks, what kind of fossils do we see? Trilobites. Everybody say trilobites. Trilobites. Trilobites had excellent precision design in their body construction. Their eyeballs were fully formed, and they had several different layers that utilized the refractive indices in order to bend light at the right angle so he could see underwater. Can you see underwater? Yeah, not too well. He was designed to see underwater, and he was buried, and now he's extinct. But the very first fossils, the lowermost layers, already perfectly designed, but buried in a destruction. Here's your design feature for Smilodon. Say Smilodon. That's saber-toothed cat. Imagine this. You got these two big teeth, and you open your mouth, but the teeth are in the way. And you try to take a bite, but your teeth are too big, and you can't get anything in your mouth because the teeth are like bars, keeping any food from getting in. Is that what happened? No, God designed it so that the jaw would hinge open even wider if it had larger teeth. So the long-toothed cats, which are now extinct cat varieties, many other cat varieties are not extinct, but the long-toothed cats that are now extinct could open their jaws even wider so that they could take a big bite with those big front teeth.
This particular ichthyosaur was actually pregnant and possibly giving birth at the time it was buried. And so in circles down here they show, this is a juvenile here, probably a newborn. Right here there's the jaw of it. Here's some of the vertebrae of another one. And inside there's still another third ichthyosaur inside if you get a chance to come take a look at this. So this particular reptile, not a dinosaur, but it was air breathing, and it actually had live birth. There were no eggs because the animals would have to swim out and swim to the surface right away, just like dolphins do. And so similar to a dolphin, but yet this was a reptile. The back tail is not broken here. That's just the way the fin the bone comes down to make the bottom of the fin, and then there was a top fin on the top, as you can see in the diagram down here. So this made the bottom of the fin, you had the top fin on the top, but the bone had actually broke down. So originally they thought this was broken when they find these, because it has a strange kink in it, but that's the way it was designed. So God designed these ichthyosaurs that swim around the oceans just like we see dolphins and porpoises today, but these are reptiles. But the pre-flood ocean was probably warmer everywhere. It wasn't just warm near the equator, so these things were able to survive. And so after the flood, these things might have survived for a long, long time, maybe many centuries, but they seem to be extinct today. We don't really see these swim in the oceans anywhere. But we do find some strange things occasionally, like the coelacanth that we thought was extinct, and we found that swimming in the ocean. So it's possible you could find some of these swimming reptiles still out there, but nobody's seen them yet today. But ichthyosaur, I've seen an ichthyosaur in Calgary that was about 30 feet long. So these things are huge.
We just saw some great evidence for design, even in extinct animal remains. This fits what the Bible tells us about God creating all animals. When we go back to those verses in Genesis that describe the creation of animals on day 5 and on day 6 of the creation week, we see the phrase "after his kind" repeated 10 times. It's as though God wanted to clarify that he made dogs to reproduce dogs, rabbits to make more rabbits, and tyrannosaurs to make more tyrannosaurs, and that no kind could evolve into another kind. This contrasts the wrong but popular belief that all animals that have ever lived evolved through countless changes from a single first animal. No evidence supports this wild tale. In the fossils, as in living animals, each created kind remains durable. Durable means that its basic form does not change, even though various attributes like feather color or height do change. So in the next section on durability, we see ICR scientists explaining that animals reproduced within their durable forms, just like Genesis taught all along.
Well, this morning I want to talk to you about dinosaurs. And the most important thing I can tell you about these dinosaurs is that God made them. Now, if you watch television or you read magazines and books, they will often tell you that dinosaurs came from other kinds of creatures. They evolved from other kinds of creatures. And they would say that all life on Earth, animals and plants, even us, they would claim supposedly came from this real simple, one-celled organism that lived many, many, many millions of years ago. But that's not what the Bible says. God made these creatures just like He did all the other creatures on this planet. And I think we need to give God the glory for making these wonderful creatures. And so there's a lot we can say about these dinosaurs. First, we don't see any evidence that they actually evolved. Okay, the evolutionists claim that, but there is no evidence for that. Now, one way we know that these dinosaurs existed is because we have the remains, what we call fossils, found in these rocks all over the world. And these rocks are a particular kind of rock that they call sedimentary rocks, and those are almost always laid down by water. And I think you may be able to see why that would be important as we talk about this later this evening in Mr. Thomas's talk on dinosaurs. But what's interesting about these fossils is we don't see any evidence that these dinosaurs evolved or came from other creatures. You know, evolution, this story they're telling us about evolution is that one kind of animal, one basic kind of animal slowly morphed or changed into another basic kind of animal. So they're claiming that fish eventually evolved into amphibians, amphibians evolved into reptiles, some reptiles turned into birds, and so on and so forth. But we don't see that. Dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. We don't find, for instance, when we look at these fossils, we don't find any fossils that are on their way to becoming dinosaurs. We just don't see that. We also, in fact, some very well-known scientists who are evolutionists who study dinosaurs have said we don't have any examples of these supposed ancestors to the dinosaurs, and that's exactly what we would expect based on creation. These creatures did not evolve. God created them just like He did all the other animals on this planet.
This is the ichthyosaur, and as you can see there, it says the name means fish lizard. And ichthyosaurs were a very unique group of aquatic reptiles, fish lizards, if you will, exquisitely designed for a marine environment. Again, you've heard this as like a broken record, but I've said that dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs. These are not dinosaurs, these are aquatic reptiles, and they have always been what? Aquatic reptiles, you bet, in all sizes and all shapes, just like the previous invertebrates, like the trilobites that we looked at. Same situation with the ichthyosaurs. There is no indication that ichthyosaurs evolved from a non-ichthyosaur ancestor. So during the creation week, God created ichthyosaurs as ichthyosaurs, and we find that they were very efficient predators in what we call the pre-flood world. As a matter of fact, ichthyosaurs like to eat ammonites. Ammonites are a coiled, shelled creature, and they actually had the dentition in order to break up and to consume some of these, what we call ammonites. I wrote an article on ammonites 15 years ago for ICR. Ammonites have always been ammonites. All sizes and all shapes, lots and lots of variation, but 100% ammonites. So when we look to the ichthyosaurs, we find that these are the creatures that inhabited, as I say, the pre-flood world very, very efficiently. And because of the Genesis flood and incredible devastation that it caused, evidently these creatures were not able to survive. Obviously, they didn't go on board the ark. None of the fish went on board the ark. And we have the sedimentary rock units that are recording the deposition of some of these creatures.
Well, this isn't a cow per se. This is actually from a buffalo or a bison. But again, I believe this is an Ice Age bison. It's a replica of these big skulls that they found here in Texas. So there were big longhorns before the longhorns came along. Before we introduced the longhorns, but there was these native bison, huge bison. This is the skull of a modern bison right here. So you can see the difference in size between the Ice Age bison after the flood, and then a modern bison. So the bison, this particular kind or species of bison is now extinct. We only have this particular species left, which is much smaller. This probably would have been twice the size. You can see the top of the skull is about twice the size. Need to be bigger to support those big horns. Those horns are very, very thick on these animals. Almost the size of the Triceratops horns, if you remember those from way back down there. So the bison, again, very unusual things, but again, just another variety of the modern day bison.
So, fossils confirm the design and durability of animal kinds that we would expect to see if Genesis 1 tells the truth. But we could not draw these conclusions without one simple practice: gathering data. Scientists, like all people, make observations. Good scientists wait to draw their conclusions until enough data are gathered that they reveal a trend, like how each animal and plant kind reproduces with durability. In this next section on data, we'll watch as ICR scientists give some general data about these fascinating fossils.
But these are the first two dinosaurs we want to talk about. These are actually dinosaur replicas. This skull over here, you guys can probably guess what this is. A T-Rex. Yes, a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull. This is one of the most complete skulls ever discovered of Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's found by a guy named Stan Sacrison. So they call this dinosaur Stan, just because he was found by Stan. If you go to Chicago and you see the big T-Rex there, it's called Sue, because it was found by a lady named Sue Hendrickson. But it's the same sort of idea. They don't know if they're males or females. They're very hard to tell. And so the name doesn't mean it was a boy or a girl necessarily. But if you look at a T-Rex, it's got the biggest teeth of any dinosaur, any meat-eating dinosaur that we've discovered. Now, originally, God created these to eat plants. So all these animals that you see today, even though after the fall of man, after man sinned, they started eating each other. We have evidence of the teeth biting into each other after the sin. But before that, God created everything to eat plants. And so these things ate plants as well. But these teeth, you can see the size of these teeth. They're the size of bananas or bigger. Sometimes they're 6 inches long. And they're all different lengths because they're always getting new teeth. So like sharks, they're always getting new teeth. And so the teeth were falling out. And I've actually found some Allosaurus teeth, the shed teeth. They're a lot smaller. They're more like the size of this thing. But this T-Rex had teeth that could chomp and crush. So it was able to crush bones probably with a single snap. Had a bite much, much stronger than an alligator or crocodile. There's some people that say it couldn't bite strong, but it could bite really, really strong. Very flexible jaw. It could see you, it could smell you. A really good nose here. The eyes are back here. I don't know if you can see this or not. This is where the eyes are. There's a lot of holes in here. God created this with a lot of holes in the skull because the skull would be really heavy if it was completely bone. And so there's lots of holes in here. But the eyes are here. If you look straight on, if you get a chance to look straight onto a T-Rex and be glad they're extinct, it can see you. It can look right at you, binocular vision. Or a lot of dinosaurs didn't have that capability, but the predators became predators. They had the ability to see you. So in Jurassic Park, if you watch those movies, be very careful because just because it's looking at you, the original movie showed that, oh, they don't move and it can't see you. Well, it could see you. So you should have been running before that.
Now, we can learn a lot about dinosaurs at the fossils, but we don't tell everything about the dinosaur through the fossils. There are some things that we simply don't know about. Even though the dentition of these dinosaurs, by that I mean teeth, look very fierce, don't they? We're not sure if they were used as scavenger or as kind of a predatory type situation. Now, the reason for that is the teeth of the dinosaur seems to have a shallow root. That's why some evolutionists and some zoologists in general are saying that maybe these were a scavenging type creature.
But this is a big, huge plant eater, almost like a rhinoceros. Kind of herded around probably like a rhinoceros. And there's all different varieties of these things with different types of horns, but they're all probably the same biblical kind. When these are born, none of them really had, the horns all appear as they mature and become adults. And so sometimes they had 3 horns, 4 horns, no horns, just a bump, all sorts of things. Hundreds of varieties, just like you have breeds of dogs, you have different breeds of these type of 4-legged ceratopsians they're called. So if you ever watch Land Before Time, you see the Sarah is named for the ceratopsian. That's the name of this group that we'll talk about. But Triceratops was a plant eater. If you look in the jaw, you see there's no teeth in the front. It's got like a beak. But then behind that, it has this big bracket of teeth. And so it could chew and chew and chew. Part of the reason for its frill, this big, huge plate that we see here, is not so much for protection, because most of these other breeds of this kind had big holes in them. So if they had holes in them, it's not going to be much good for protection. But in this case, it had a fairly solid frill going back, and then the big huge rib cage in the tail at the end. But the teeth down here are pretty spectacular. They bit together almost like scissors. And so the jaws would come in together. The inner jaw would go underneath the upper jaw and cause almost like the way scissors bite things. So it could bite really, really strong and tough and coarse vegetation. And the jaw muscles were stretched way back because of that frill. So that frill helped it bite really, really hard. And so it could bite things, much harder than most Plantian dinosaurs could do. You notice the eyes on this though are right underneath the horns. They're right in here. And so if you look straight on, some of you over there are looking straight on, you'll see that it can't see you. It can't see straight ahead. Remember, the T-Rex could see straight ahead because it was looking for things to eat, looking for what it wanted to eat. This thing couldn't see. It just smelled probably well. Had a big nose area, a little horn in the nose, but it was looking for predators coming after it. So it could see out to the side really well on either side, but it couldn't really see straight ahead. So if you were right here where these children are, you're in danger of getting run over and stepped on by this thing because they couldn't see you. It would just come walking right along like a big rhino, tromp, 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 tromp. Step right on you, but if you're coming from the side, it could see you. And we're not really sure if that frill was really used for protection, if the horns were used for protection against the T-Rex. They always show that in the paintings, but nobody really knows if these just sparred with each other, somewhat like antlers on deer. But these are real bones. Now, these are permanent things. They had a casing over the top of these that came out really sharp. And so they were very, very sharp things. They see a lot of scratches in the other Triceratops frills that seem to match up with some of these. So we're not really sure, what the horns were used, probably some for protection, but also maybe to spar with other male Triceratops, sparring for the females in the herd type of thing, like deer do and elk do. And so there's behavior of dinosaurs is very difficult to tell because we don't have a living dinosaur. And so we have to speculate from the rocks. But this thing, again, buried in the flood, one of the last dinosaurs to be buried in the flood along with the T-Rex. And so this thing apparently made it a little longer than some, but again, anything that wasn't on the ark, it was air breathing. By day 150 of the flood, it was no more. It was buried in the rocks. So we find these bones because they were buried so rapidly. So this is one of the somewhat famous dinosaurs, although this particular specimen isn't. This is a dromaeosaur, but the more famous one is the velociraptor. You guys have heard of velociraptor? Velociraptor is about half this size. They're very, very small. In the movies, they make it out to be much, much too big, even bigger than this. This was found in North America. It's a replica. I think the tail's a little dislocated here. It shouldn't be up quite that high. The replica actually made the tail stick up a little bit too high. But notice the back of the tail is all solid. There's no flexibility in the tail at all at the end. So this thing, when it walked, it just stepped side to side. The tail went back and forth, kind of like a balance beam. And so they probably couldn't run 20, 30 miles an hour. We're not really sure, again, on the speeds of some of the dinosaurs because we don't have a living dinosaur. But this thing was probably very agile and quick. It could move around, jump on things, and then use its claw to kind of grab on. The claw wasn't used to slash because it isn't sharp underneath. It was probably used just to grasp onto prey. And so there's a misconception about that as well. But that's a dromaeosaur, very, very sharp little teeth, and became a meat eater, we believe, after the fall of man. After man sinned, animals started eating each other, and the dromaeosaurs and the velociraptors started eating each other.
And the one that's right in front of me is Edmontosaurus. Say that.
Edmontosaurus.
And it's named after the place where it was found, which was Edmonton, Canada. And it was a duck-bill dinosaur, not because it had a bill, but it had a mouth in the shape of a duck-bill. And this skull came from an animal that was huge. It was 40 feet long from nose to tail. And the leg of the Edmontosaurus was taller than I could reach. And so I could have walked right underneath his belly and not even brush my head under it. So big creature, but it was a plant eater. How do I know? Because not long ago, scientists found a Edmontosaurus mummy, naturally mummified in the ground. And they peeled back the sand that it was deposited in. And underneath the sand, what did they see? His stomach contents. What was in his stomach? Old, blackened, dried down, partly mummified plant parts. So we know what he ate, plant parts. And those little razor-sharp teeth were like tiny scissors, and they were very well designed to slice through even the toughest of plant matter. In fact, some of the Edmontosaurus stomach contents reveal little bits of bark. Now that's not much of a meal, but he made it into a meal.
This is a pteranodon, which is a flying reptile. It had big long finger that stretched way out, made its wing. One finger, that's the finger bone, stretched all the way out. So it's different than any other type of a bat. A bat will have like all of its fingers. They're elongated. This just has one finger elongated. These other two are dinosaurs. And these are plant-eating dinosaurs. Over there you have a Pachycephalosaurus. And that Pachycephalosaurus had a really thick skull. And we think it might have actually butted heads with each other. Maybe as a mating ritual. We're not really sure if it used it to butt away the prey that was trying to come after it. We're not really sure, but it had a really thickened skull, really odd, little tiny little small teeth. We think both of these ate plants.
Now, some creationists, we're not really, the Bible talks about an animal called the Leviathan, and we're not sure exactly what it is, but some creationists have speculated that maybe the Leviathan was a mosasaur. Okay. Others think, no, maybe it was one of the super crocs, what they call the Sarcosuchus imperator. Others said, no, maybe it was another kind of creature. But this is one of the candidates that people have proposed for the Leviathan. So you have these big swimming aquatic reptiles, pretty sharp looking teeth, but again, in God's original creation, this would not have been a dangerous animal, okay? And you would not have had to be afraid of it.
Over here we have a swimming reptile skull called a Tylosaurus. And this is a type of mosasaur. So if you saw the most recent Jurassic Park movie, you see the mosasaur jumping out of the water? That's what this thing was. And if you look inside, you can see there's actually teeth inside, underneath in the roof of the mouth. It had another whole set of teeth inside there. So if you got inside of this thing, you weren't going to get out. Neither were the fish it was probably eating and other animals that ate. It's a big, long thing. They estimate it to be 45 feet long. This is just the skull of it, a replica of the skull. This was found in Kansas. So again, we have marine things in the middle of Kansas. Lots of evidence of the flood that flooded across North America, bringing these sediments in from the deep oceans and mixing them with the dinosaurs in many cases as well. But you can see this had lots of teeth. The teeth were coming in new as well. He would grow and eat things. They would lose teeth just like the T-Rex and the other dinosaurs. Even though this wasn't a dinosaur, it still had teeth that worked the same sort of way. And so you get the nose up here, the eye would be back here. Why did it have a nose? Because it breathed air. It was just like the ichthyosaur, it breathed the air. Reptiles have to breathe air. So it had to come up every so often like whales and breathe. It might be able to hold its breath for quite a while, but it had to live its whole life in the water with just little flipper type things. It couldn't crawl on land like the ichthyosaur couldn't crawl on land like turtles do. And so it had to give live birth. These things probably had live birth as well, although there's no evidence for it to really know for sure. There's flexures in the jaw right here. So it could actually expand its jaw. And the T-Rex was the same way. There's flexures in those jaws. They could actually expand, possibly like snakes, and chew things and not break their jaws. So these could bite down pretty hard as well. So if you saw this swimming, and this, how long these things survived after the flood, they seem to be extinct today. But there's lots of stories about sea monsters that sailors have been telling for centuries. There could have been some truth to that. They might have seen the last of these before they went extinct after the flood. So we're not really sure if there's any of these alive today, but we think they're extinct. So again, if you see one of these in one of the lakes around here, let me know. So I'd like to come study it, but they probably, if anywhere, they may be in some obscure part of the ocean, which we haven't explored nearly as much as we think we have. I think we've explored the moon more than we've explored the deep ocean. So it's possible there's a lot of hidden animals out there that we never even described or saw. And there could be a mosasaur out there, but they might not be this big anymore. In the pre-flood world, things were growing and could grow and grow and be hundreds of years old because the humans lived to be hundreds of years old. A lot of these huge dinosaurs were probably hundreds of years old, and these things were hundreds of years old as well. Just recently, in the news, I think about last week, they found a 400-year-old shark that the scientists caught. And so we know sharks can live hundreds of years, so it's no surprise these things could live hundreds of years as well.
Now that we have gathered some data, observed evidence for design, and heard descriptions of reproductive durability, we can think more clearly about what TV shows and textbooks say about dinosaurs. we can compare what scientists who reject God teach to what the Bible and the fossils show. We at the Institute for Creation Research constantly encounter deceptive tactics and teachings that evolutionists present to prop up their false ideas. For example, they insist that nature, not God, made dinosaurs. But in order to do that, they must deceive themselves into believing that animal bodies can change without limits, that a sea sponge can change into a Spinosaurus. This next section touches on a few more examples of deception.
What's so very exciting about the Triceratops, ladies and gentlemen, is in the Hell Creek Formation in eastern Montana, one of my friends was digging around with some others, and they unearthed a portion of the Triceratops horn. And this was significant because it wasn't buried very deeply within the sedimentary rock units. When he took out the Triceratops horn and began to investigate it and research, guess what they found? They found cells called osteocytes. Osteo means bone, cyte means cell. So they actually found bone cells. Of course, they were dead, but morphologically, in the anatomy of that, the microanatomy, they were able to tell that these were actually bone cells of the Triceratops.
I remember when I went to a museum in Wyoming, I was a little kid, and the first time I saw a sauropod dinosaur, it was huge, and I saw this big thing, and I said, what in the world is that? Because I had never seen one in my backyard or anything, or even at the zoo. And my mom said, well, let's ask the museum people. So the museum lady said, that's a dinosaur. And it lived millions of years ago, long before grass ever evolved. So grass had not yet evolved. So it was eating not grass, and it was eating something else. Now, in the Bible, we have this interesting book. It's one of the oldest books in the Bible. It's called the book of Job. In chapter 40 of Job, it says, behold now Behemoth, which I made along with you on day 6. Look at the behemoth. His bones are like bronze bars. His ribs are like bars of bronze, and his bones are just huge. And his strength is in his hips. And his tail is like a cedar tree. And when the river rages, it doesn't bother him at all. He just stands there and takes it. And he sits by the lotus tree, and he eats grass like an ox. So I think he's talking about a dinosaur, and that's the best thing that fits the description of a tail like a cedar tree. But that means that dinosaurs lived alongside Job, and that means God was talking to Job about an animal that he was familiar with. And it says that he ate grass like an ox. Well, if that's a dinosaur, how could he eat grass if grass had not yet evolved in the quote-unquote dinosaur times? Well, that was a dilemma until just a few years ago, scientists found a sauropod dinosaur poo fossil from India, and they cut it open, and they looked inside, and you know what they saw inside the dinosaur poo? Fossilized bits of grass. And guess what the sauropod was eating? Grass, just like the Bible said all along. So the Bible got it right, and it took scientists a while to catch up.
This is actually a bird, a fossilized bird, that some of the paleontologists try to claim is a dinosaur, but actually this is a bird. You can see the feather imprints and everything. So this is a true bird found in rocks, in the flood rocks, buried in the rocks, just like that particular pteranodon was found in flood rocks as well. And so this was found in Germany. They found about 11 of these specimens now called Archaeopteryx. There'll be a test on this later, Archaeopteryx, which means ancient wing type of thing. But this was one of the very first birds about the size of a crow.
Now over here, we also have some examples of what are called trilobites. These are marine critters that supposedly lived around 500 million years ago. And evolutionists like to claim that these are very primitive organisms. But what's interesting about the trilobites, though, is that they have a very sophisticated eye. Okay, there's some things about the eye of these creatures that we didn't understand the optics until maybe 200 or 300 years ago. So they're very, the evolutionists love to say these are simple creatures, they're primitive. Well, no, they're not. And yet this is one of the first organisms that you actually see in the fossils. Okay, it's buried down kind of toward the bottom, and we argue that that's because this lived in a probably shallow marine environment, and during the flood it would have been buried It'd probably been one of the first things to be buried.
Do you remember what Mr. Sherwin just said about soft tissue inside a Triceratops horn? Let me explain why that is so important and how it involves a particular point of deception. Evolutionary scientists insist that the Earth has existed for millions of years. They need to believe in such long spans of time because that's how long they imagine it might take for fish to evolve into dinosaurs or dinosaurs to evolve into chickens. And that's what made Mr. Sherwin's lesson about finding soft, pliable tissue embedded in a Triceratops bone so important. Body tissues like that are made of proteins, and proteins cannot last for 1,000,000 years. Secular scientists now create stories of how proteins could somehow last many times longer. But decay rate studies refute those stories. Dinosaur bone and skin proteins like those found in T-Rex, Hadrosaurs, Psittacosaurus, and others erase the long ages that evolutionary stories require. When we think about these proteins in light of recent creation, then finding soft tissues that could only last for thousands of years inside dinosaur bones makes much more sense. Evolutionary thinkers would love to find a fossil creature that was part dinosaur and part bird, because it would show one creature evolving into another. That's the deceptive teaching they claim about Archaeopteryx. But Dr. Clary just reminded us that Archaeopteryx was already fully a bird. So those who deceive themselves into thinking that Archaeopteryx was anything less than a fully formed bird have to ignore facts like its wings and feathers. When we focus on the facts and cut out the evolutionary stories, we begin to see how well the evidence fits the Bible. The last topic on our tour, which we call destruction, deals with rapid, cataclysmic, watery, muddy, miserable burial of dinosaurs and sea creatures on every continent. Our scientists all agree that the enormous scale of watery destruction that Earth's rocks and fossils reveal clearly confirm the Genesis flood.
By the way, there's something else about the Archaeopteryx I should mention. One of the kids here noticed that the neck of that creature was thrown back. It kind of looks like it was broken. It's very common. You actually see that in the fossils a bunch where the neck is thrown back. They call that the death pose. And it's very common, and that's basically occurring because this lack of oxygen is causing its central nervous system to malfunction. Okay, it's basically being asphyxiated. Okay, and that's a strong indication of violent, quick death. Okay, and of course that's exactly what we would expect based on the biblical account.
Can you see the fish? Short people in the front, tall people in the back. Now that fish this is a replica. The real one was found in a chalk formation in Kansas. Now, is Kansas anywhere near the ocean? No, it's in the middle of dry land, which tells us that the ocean must have been on dry land. And I was raised in Kansas, and that's the first time I ever saw a fossil. Was a fossil oyster in the middle of my backyard in Kansas. And I thought, I've seen these when I went to the beach, but there's no beach anywhere near here. What happened? A mega watery destruction is what happened. And the Bible tells us that that's what happened. It said Noah's flood covered every high hill that existed before the flood under the whole heavens. They were all covered with water. And it was so disastrous, the destruction was so complete that it mixed fish. By the way, that's a toothy fish, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to have him in your aquarium? It mixed fish with pteranodons, buried in the same layer, along with reptiles and other creatures and lots of shallow marine creatures. So this was a total destruction. But of course, as you could see, he was fully designed to live the way he lived. He had all the body parts in all the right places to be a perfectly functional zyphunctus fish.
Over here we have this huge fish, which you probably wouldn't want to catch in one of the lakes around here. Is there a Louisville lake down here? Yeah, you don't want to catch this in there. If you catch that, cut your line. Because it's got big teeth. And this is very common in the rocks in Kansas. They find these, in the flood rocks in the middle of Kansas. So how do you get fish in the middle of Kansas? Well, the flood easily answers that question, mixes them with dinosaurs. So even our dinosaurs are mixed in with marine fossils. The T-Rex we talked about earlier, actually there's 5 species of sharks found in those same rocks. How do you get sharks and T-Rexes mixed together? Unless there's mixing of the ocean onto the land. And that's exactly what we expect in the flood. And even that pteranodon was found in chalk. Chalk is a marine sediment. Chalk only forms in the oceans. So the chalk itself, shows these things are buried in marine rocks that were brought onto the land. On the other side over there, you see some trilobites, which are arthropods. They're not quite insects, but they have lots of little legs. And they crawled around with a segmented body. And in my home state of Michigan, there's lots and lots of those trilobites as well. But these are from Morocco. The bigger ones, the ones in Michigan generally are smaller for some reason. It must have been colder. I think it's colder in Michigan than, probably not. It was all pretty warm probably in the pre-flood world. But those are examples of trilobites. Those I believe are real specimens from Morocco. And they were kind of like those little roly-polies you see crawling around, but they lived in the oceans as well.
The one that is directly in front of me is called an Edmontosaurus. It's a kind of duck-billed dinosaur, hadrosaur. And one of the interesting things about this is this creature, it was a plant eater, but it had more teeth than any other animal, around 1,200 teeth. Okay, so this is and when it grows, it gets very large. And what's interesting is, I believe this one was found in South Dakota, and it turns out there's a county in South Dakota where they have found 10,000, approximately, 10,000 of these these Edmontosaurs that have been buried together. Now you think about that. These are big animals. Something big had to happen to bury 10,000 of them all at once. Okay, and remember, they got to be buried quickly. Because if normally fossils don't form, right? Normally, if an animal dies, its body's going to decay, or maybe it'll be eaten by scavengers. But in order for it to fossilize, it's got to be buried quickly so it can be protected from that kind of thing. So these animals were buried quickly.
So this is some of the spectacular things that God created as part of His created world that we can still find the fossils of. This fish and those trilobites, we think, are extinct. We don't see them in the oceans today. So there must have been some unique environments in the pre-flood world that God created that were destroyed in the flood. And so some of these species also went extinct in the flood, because He didn't say He would protect all the marine animals. He just said He'd protect one of every, two of every kind of the land, air-breathing animals. And so that's kind of what we end up with. All right, this is a strange collection of things, because you have skulls from different rock layers that we don't really find together. These Smilodon here, this saber-toothed cat, we find that mostly in Ice Age sediments on top of the flood sediments. So this is a cat, a tiger type thing or a lion type thing that had these big, huge teeth in its jaw. So anybody watch the Ice Age movies? You see those in that. And so these things are kind of a type of a lion, probably the same kind, and it got off the ark. And during the Ice Age, these things kind of roamed around, did their thing. This would have been on the ark. This particular specimen was found in after the flood.
I'm so glad you could join us for our fossil tour today. I hope that seeing God's design in dinosaurs stirs you to praise Him for His wisdom in crafting incredible creatures, for His kindness to tell us about creation through His Word, and even His providence for letting us live in a world where toothy titans like tyrannosaurs no longer threaten us. With the truths we've discussed today, we can have more confidence than ever that God spoke very accurately about creatures reproducing with durability, faithful to their created kinds. We can thank Him, too, for making us to see, touch, taste, smell, measure, and collect all the data from His world that confirms the data in His Word. How else would we be able to separate facts from evolutionary stories that fool so many people into doubting the Bible? Finally, the sheer size of those waterborne rock layers that contain thousands of dinosaur carcasses mixed with sea creatures and found on every continent clearly point to Noah's flood. What about those who don't believe Noah's flood ever happened? The Apostle Peter warned his readers that those kinds of scoffers would come. He wrote in 2 Peter 3, 5, and 6, "For this they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water." This verse confirms created design, quote, by the word of God, not by nature. It emphasizes the worldwide extent of the flood's destruction, which would have left its evidence on every continent. and it foretold deception when they willfully forget key historical, miraculous events like creation and the flood. Our tour revealed the amazing design of animal bodies, durability of created kinds, data from fossils, the deception of evolutionary thinking, and destruction of the ancient world. Like 2 Peter 3, all these remind us that creation and the flood really happened. Since we can trust what the Bible says about our past, we can trust what it says about our future. Thank you for joining us.